I mentioned before that McDowell saw his target audience as older adults, but it's interesting to see how darker and edgier the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy is compared to any of the previous Bantam releases. In Tyrant's Test alone, we have the first appearance of profanity like son of a bitch and bastard when Han is talking back to the Yavitha in chapters 4 and 5. We have some pretty graphic violence. There's a very descriptive disembowelment in chapter 4. In chapter 5, Akana is asked by a random, unnamed man whether she's ever had sex in hyperspace. Tyrant's Test made it to number 13 on the New York Times paperback bestseller list for the week of December 22nd, 1996, and was ultimately on the list for 3 weeks. Now this time around, the only thing I remembered was the cover. I know I read this at least once, but I remembered nothing. So a brief summary. Chewbacca and his family set out on a daring mission to rescue Han from the Yavitha, while Leia calls upon the Senate to eliminate the threat posed by the Duskin League once and for all, even if it means losing her husband. Lando has to face the threat of Imperials and possible starvation while stuck in the runaway Quella spaceship, while Luke finally makes some progress on his hunt for the Falanasi. I couldn't help feeling this time around that Lando's plotline was even more irrelevant to the main plot as a whole, because the way that McDowell chose to structure it was that Lando's parts are interludes, which are interspersed between basically chapters dealing with the Black Fleet Crisis. Did I still enjoy Lando's adventure and like and appreciate that we got more development for Lobot? Yes, to both. But I felt like my enjoyment of Lando's quest was sort of ruined a little bit by the Deus Ex Machina at the end. Lando and Lobot have spent what feels like a long time on the ship, but probably isn't really that long since they have no food and limited water. But they're not looking good. They're able to lure the ship back to Quella, and it's not going as planned. They're not able to get Lando and Lobot and Co off the ship or anything, until magically Luke appears, uses the only Falanasi skill he's learned to get on board the ship, food and water to Lando and Lobot, use Lobot's cybernetic headpiece to talk to the ship, tell it it's okay to start the thaw. He gets them off, it starts to thaw, and then he once again uses his only Falanasi skill to hide the ship for a time being. Lando and Lobot basically play no role in the conclusion of the Quella spaceship plot. And since this subplot had no role to play whatsoever with the big overarching Black Fleet Crisis plotline, I just felt like I was tricked into reading a very long Shaggy Dog story. And with the Lando subplot, I'm just left wondering why. Even after everything's completed and Luke saves the day and gets the thaw started, nothing's going to happen for 100 years or more. Well, what was the point of all that? And perhaps it's only inevitable that, of course, Luke doesn't find his mother. While they didn't start filming episode 1 until 1997, they had been doing art production since 1995, so presumably when McDowell said, oh, and I want Luke to find his mother, someone was like, you can't touch that part of the saga. But it just feels like Luke is on this fool's errand then, even with the benefit of hindsight. I don't know how anyone reading this at the time could have thought that Luke was really going to find his mother, so it just feels pointless in a different way, and yet very much like Lando's plotline. Luke was vastly improved from the first 2 books, but he was still remarkably inactive. He and Akana find the Falanasi on Jutupitan. He talks to them. Weiluu decides that she's going to aid the Fifth Fleet against the Yavitha, and Luke just observes. He tells General Abbott that he doesn't see himself fulfilling the warrior role right now, which is fine, which is fair enough. He rescues Lando and he heads back to Coruscant, dismantles his Hermitage rock jack fortress, and tells Leia that, yeah, he's here, he's committed to the family that he has, and he's gonna help her with the kids. This feels a little bit like too little too late. I didn't need Luke in an X-Wing shooting people down. I just expected a little bit more from him than what we got. And ultimately, I feel like I both love and loathe Akana. I love how she has the balls to go to Luke Skywalker, lie to his face, get to drag him along on her quest, not his. Because I guess she wanted a bodyguard. She wanted to instruct someone in the Falinasi ways. But I also loathe her because she doesn't really have the guts to come out and tell him this. There's a lot of pitiful excuses she gives for why she lied to him and why she wasn't able to teach him the things that she promised that she would teach him. People usually rank Akana as one of Luke's failed past girlfriends, but I'm not even sure you could call her a girlfriend. I think McDowell makes it pretty clear that they're never involved intimately, so she's just more like a con artist who took Luke Skywalker for a ride. I never would have guessed, though, from the first book that Leia, in the second book and in this one, was my absolute favorite plotline. I love what she's trying to deal with. In a way, it felt a little bit repetitive after having to deal in the New Rebellion with a plotline where she possibly could be removed from office. But I actually liked how she addressed it better in Tyrant's test than in New Rebellion. Instead of running off and handing off the reins of power to someone else, she stands firm. She says, no, I'm not stepping down. My husband may have been captured by our enemy, but that's what they want me to do. They want me to step aside, and I'm not going to. All these people come to her with ideas of how she can improve her image, get more people to side with her, and she honestly doesn't listen to any of them. She just outright declares war against the Duskin League. After that, though, I was expecting the battles to be more. The political stuff was so good and so nuanced that I guess I was expecting McDowell to take the same approach with the actual battles and military sci-fi aspect of it, because there'd been so much in the previous two books about describing ships and how the fleets work and all that. And while there was some of that here, I felt like the battles as a whole suffered. I also thought there was going to be more with the black box that they get from that senator that Nilspar was using. He realizes that he's been had, the Yevotha are not going to give him a thrust ship, so he turns in the spy device that he had to Leia. Leia pretty much knocks him out. She's pissed. It's a great scene. And they sort of figure out how it works, but I was expecting them to use it like for counter-espionage or to send false information to Nilspar. And in a way they did, because they had that politician talk to the Yevotha and tell them stuff that wasn't true. But I guess I thought they would use it more, and I thought they would figure out who used the box to betray Han, but I didn't get the sense that they ever figured that out either. After Chewbacca went home and before the storm and was completely absent for all of Shield of Lies, I wasn't expecting him to show up for Tyrant's test, but he did, and it was great. McDowell gave us some world building about the Wookiee home world, which I can't pronounce. It's Kashyyyk or something like that. I'm not sure if this is stuff that he invented or stuff that Lucasfilm gave him, but it was great. And then we get Chewie building a team to go rescue Han. The rescue was very exciting. His son Lumpy got to come along. And the Wookiees, for once, actually talk. We don't have them roar and then someone translates what they say. McDowell actually gives us their speech. And it's not like we have them talking and people who wouldn't understand, because once they've rescued Han and they're coming to the Fifth Fleet, the only person that knows that they're speaking in Shriyuk is Luke when he listens in. So it was pretty good. Poor Lumpa Warump. gets to go through his rite of passage. He's now an adult. He gets to take a new name, which means that he now has a much more palatable nickname. Instead of Lumpy, he is Waru. Gonna disregard the fact that there was a previous Waru who was a gold blob, but you'll have to admit that Waru is much better than Lumpy. On the Yevitha front, they're just irredeemably bad. There's not really any that you can root for. They're just violent and bloody, and they don't give up. General Bot's actually really surprised at the end that when they're fighting them, even though a good majority of their fleet has taken off into hyperspace towards Biss, they just keep coming and they're not willing to give up, and they sort of almost have kamikaze pilots that the starfighters are just throwing themselves at ships, and you can't take out some and then they'll go, okay, fine, we surrender. He literally has to destroy every single ship because they won't give up. I guess if we're going to pursue that World War II analogy, there aren't any Yevitha who have seen the error of their ways. They're going to keep fighting till the end, which I wish was a little different, but we can't always get what we want, can we? Bad guys this time were not the Empire. And in fact, the Imperials that we meet don't want to fight the New Republic, don't want anything to do with that. It's just the Yevitha and their imperialistic urges getting the better of them. I still wish they were a little more nuanced, though. I do like the Imperials, though. We don't really get much of them, just that they've been slave labor for the past 13 years and have slowly been creating slave circuits for all the Imperial ships. So at a pivotal point in the battle, leader of the Imperials activates those slave circuits, and all the Imperial ships, the Super Star Destroyer and all the Star Destroyers, they jump into hyperspace towards the deep core to Biss. This is obviously McDowell leaving something open-ended that maybe in a later book someone will utilize this fleet that's gone to the deep core. Of course, no one does utilize it, so we don't know what happens to them. But I like that. I liked them getting revenge on their captors. And Nilspar, rather than being killed by the Yevitha, like I sort of imagined would happen, he's killed by the Imperials. They put him in escape pod and eject him out while they're in hyperspace. So he is definitely dead and we will never recover his body. Some of my issues, though, with the book come down to, like I said, that felt like the big battle wasn't big enough. There was so much buildup and the fleet's moving and they're moving all these ships in and pulling ships out and pulling them in. Then really all we got was a few ships attacking the shipyard that they found, which I have to agree with the second in command there when he was like, why are we attacking them? This is just a suicide mission. Wouldn't it make more sense to, oh, this is where the shipyard is. Let's gonna make sure they don't see us, get word back to General Bot, and then they could send a bigger fleet in. Because while they did take out the Thrush ships and that shipyard, it seemed at the loss of an awful lot of New Republic ships and crew members. And then the final battle itself, I guess a big part of it was the Falinasi creating the illusion of ships that the Yevitha focus all their power on until finally Weelu's like, oh, it's too much. And she like passes out. And then it's the real ships fighting. But when sort of taken out of their sails by the jump into hyperspace of all the Imperials, I'm not sure how interesting you could make people continuing to fight to the last. I did find it sort of poignant, though, how Plat Malar died, that basically he took the captain's X-Wing, so when he died stopping a suicide bomber ship from taking out the big ship, no one knew who to credit because he wasn't assigned to that ship. He sacrificed himself and no one will ever know. I also felt like Luke used a few dubious force powers. The main one I'm going to focus on is when he and Akana have stopped on a planet to, like, I don't know, get fuel, get the mud sloth fixed up, and Akana gets mad at him and she takes off and she's contemplating stealing a ship. He's trying to get information about the Black Fleet crisis, so he comes in, says, I'm Luke Skywalker, I have this clearance, I need to get this information. They let him, and then he wipes their memories. They're really happy and excited to have seen Luke Skywalker, and he just destroys that. I don't know how I felt about that. I'm also a little confused how Luke was able to pick up the one Thalanasi skill he learned when Akana literally gives him no instruction. I guess he's a very good observer of things. I also felt like Han was perhaps underused in this book. He's been sort of a sideline character for most of the trilogy, but in this one he's captive. He gets beat up more than once. He's rescued by Chewbacca and family, and then he just spends the rest of the book either in hospital or en route to a better facility. Even in the end, Leia's coming back with the kids, I guess from visiting him in a medical center, and then Luke is waiting for her and they talk. And so sort of like in the New Rebellion where we just hear that Luke was in Bacta and that's it. And I guess he's okay. It's the same thing here. Well, he visited him. I guess he's okay. I also felt like things were perhaps a little too coincidental. Of course, Luke shows up right when it's looking really bad for Lando and Lobot and saves the day. And sort of the same way, of course, Luke just happens to be in the Cornac cluster when all of this is going on and able to introduce the Thalanasi to the Fifth Fleet and help them in that way. You could probably argue that it's the Force, and the Force is making him be in the right place at the right time. But it does sometimes feel like a little too much for me. And in the end, it just felt like, other than the conflict against the Yevitha, there wasn't a lot of resolution. Lando's alive. I guess that's the best we can expect. Same with Han. He's alive. You won't see any more of him. Luke's learned that he's not ready to be a hermit, and that an old lady Force tradition doesn't want to accept him. For all that, there was this big threat building. For a lot of the subplots, the end just seemed like a return to status quo. And I love all the politics stuff. It's just sort of crazy how none of it was used in any later books. I actually really like all the development that McDowell does with the Senate and the different councils and committees, but no one uses it. And from the New Jedi Order really onwards, Leia's not involved in politics anymore. She's solely a Jedi. It just seems like a waste almost. So, in short, Tyrant's Test has a very good main plot with Leia. Unfortunately, then it also has the interesting but irrelevant Lando plot and a Luke plot that still drove me bonkers. Added on to that was just a final battle that I felt like could have been a whole lot more than it actually was. And I'm left with the feeling that I wish McDowell had just written about Leia. That it had been all politics and all fleet movements, and that Luke's quest to find himself had been left off, and maybe Lando's adventure had been saved for a standalone story. So if you really like politics and Leia being a badass, yeah, read the Black Fleet Crisis trilogy. If you want to know what Luke's up to, this is a skip. Luke doesn't really make much progress here. He's just treading water at this point. So next time, I will be reading the third of the short story collections that were edited by Kevin J. Anderson, Tales of the Bounty Hunters.